Hi. We're going to have a quick look at an introduction to using the Mash Dynamics inside Maya. I'm using Maya 2020, just so we've got kind of parity on everyone's software. Okay, so we're just going to create this little tiny animation. It's just across 90 frames. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set the frame length. Just let my computer catch up with a few other things going on in the background. And I've been using that IPR renderer up here, so I'll just show you what that IPR renderer does. So go onto the screen, but close that down. The IPR renderer just basically gives you an updated version of what's going on the screen. So frame by frame, it's going to update with texture and light details. Okay, it's a little bit takes a little bit of computation now, so it slows things down. Let's just turn that off for a moment. Okay, so you'll probably find that your animation sequence is set to something different than mine. So I put the full extent of my animation to 90 frames. So basically, this first figure shows you what's available in the viewer here on the timeline, and this is the full extent. So if I even type in 400 there, you'll see nothing changes here in the timeline. But if I type in 400 there, now the timeline extends, the vision or the view of the timeline extends to 400. So I'm just going to keep that to 90, full extent. It's going to be a short animation. And we'll begin by looking at the animation settings down here in the bottom right hand corner. A little guy being chased by a cogwheel. And inside here, the only things that we really need to do is look at the frame rate, 24 frames a second. Look at the playback speed, 24 FPS times 1, that's fine. You may want to update this option where normally it says update view, it normally is set to active. I flipped it over to all, and basically all that does is it makes sure that all your windows update when an animation is sequencing. You can turn it one way, the active one window, or active for all of them. I prefer it with all. A little thing that I do up here as well is that I change the key tick size. Now this is when you're making a keyframe. I find in Maya the keyframe indicator is really tiny, so I set it to 5. So apart from that, they're pretty much the settings I'm using. Everything else is pretty much what you'd expect. I can't think there's anything else that we're going to be needing right now. So just inside the time slider settings, 24 frames a second, playback speed 24 times 1, and as I said, the update. That's all I changed. So that's down there in the bottom right hand corner. I'm using the animation toolset, which is available here. So this drop down window up here give you different toolsets. And as you can see, the menu system changes to reflect the toolset that you're selecting. Later on, we'll be using the rendering one, but for the moment, I'm going to use animation. And in the workspace, I've chosen the Mash workspace, and that again will give us access to this interface here, which we're going to use. Okay, I think that's everything we need to know. There are a couple more things, but I'll come to those later. This is, I'm going to try and keep it short, so I may go a little bit quick here and there, but I'm trying not to let this thing run out of control because there's quite a few things to cover. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is, well, let's have a little look at the scene in completion. So that's all there is in the scene. There's one light. There's one ground plane at the bottom. There is actually only one piece of geometry in here. It's one cube, and the cube's been introduced to the Mash dynamic system, and the Mash dynamic system has generated all these other elements. Okay, but in effect, it is just one cube. So let's strip this away and start again. Okay, so everything's been removed. And then we're looking at outliner here, we'll see there's nothing there. Okay, so first thing we're going to do is I'm going to create a little cube. So I'm holding the Shift key and the right click, and I'm just selecting cube. I'm just going to drag it out and up, and I'll just make sure, get my move tool, select, go over here to the attribute editor, and this cube, I'm going to just set it to 2 by 2 by 2. Try to just drag that across, go again, so 2, tab 2, tab 2, and there's my little cube. Alright, let's turn the shaded and wireframe view on, so we've got the edges too. Okay, so a little tiny cube. I'm also going to create a ground plane, so this time round I'll hit the Shift key, right click, and I'll choose, oh, sorry, come off there, do it in neutral space, do that. So it's got the Shift key, I'm going to go to plane, and this time I'm going to click the little settings box, and I'm going to type in here 500 by 500. That means now when I click in the viewport, I'll create an enormous ground plane. Just to show you, it's a pretty big ground plane. There it is. Alright, and I'm going to push it down. So I've got the remove tool, that's W, and I'm just going to push that ground plane down a little bit. So let's look at that. Okay, push it down about there. Alright, good. Let's introduce a light into the scene. So let's go to Arnold and lights. I'm going to put an area light in the scene. Drag my area light up a little bit. Let's have a little view of this area light. So that little green line there indicates which way it's pointing. Okay, so for the time being, I'll just roll that around. And just turn that around. I'll turn it down. And I'll also scale it. So I'm just using the QWER keys to navigate through the transform. I would call them transforms because I'm used to 3ds Max, but in Maya they're called translations. So I'm just going to change those like so. Everything's gone a little bit red because I've slipped inside the subobject mode of that ground plane. And now I'm just going to call the Hypershade editor, and I'm going to add some materials to the scene. So the first material I'm going to add to the scene is, oh, no valid output statements. Could be a progressive render without a display window. Not entirely sure what that means. We'll find out. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is this cube. I've got a material already set up. It's just basically an Arnold standard surface material. And for the ground plane, I've got another Arnold standard surface material. So I'm right clicking and I'm just selecting standard surface material 1 for the ground plane and 2 for the cube. Okay, so my light is pointing downwards at a slight angle. I've got a single cube in the scene. I've got a ground plane. That's everything so far. I've added 2 materials. I'll just show you the Hypershade. Hypershade, and I've just got basically standard surface for the cube and a blue standard surface for the ground plane. I have turned the specularity down a little bit, so I've got roughness up a little bit on both of them. I think roughness is up a little bit, and the metalness or the specularity is kind of down. I don't want to cause too many big kind of like shiny highlights at this point, so that's just a little adjustment there to standard surface materials. If you've never created a standard surface material before inside Maya, it's just over here on the left hand side, and you can just type in standard and you'll get a Arnold shader surface AI standard surface. Just drag it on, change your colour, change various properties that you wish in here, and apply to the object in your scene. Okay, close that down. Okay, so at the moment, standard surface 1 seems to have gone green. That's not what I wanted. I wanted it a little bit more blue. So let's get the kind of blue colour. Oh, somewhere in there. That'll do. Okay, so for the time being, let's look at this light to begin with, and if we look at the light and go over to the attributes editor here on the right hand side, we'll see that the area AI area light shape 1 has got a colour of white, it's got an intensity of 1 and an exposure of 0. If I change that exposure to something about 9, we should start to see an effect on the object. Okay, there's a couple little things that we need to do in here. I'm going to put the spread down to 0.5, so 0.5. I'm going to change the resolution to 1024. I'm going to leave the roundness, soft edges as it is. I'm going to change the samples up to 3. It increases the render time a little bit, but it also gives you a little bit more payback in quality. We'll look at the render time quality issue a little bit in a short while. I'm also going to scale the light a little bit more, I think. Okay, so you see the light becomes a little less intense when it's a bit bright, a bit bigger, because in effect that light's been spread across a distance. Okay, so got one scene, one light, sorry, one cube, one plane, one light, that's all. Okay, so we're going to just click on our cube, and now we're going to introduce the mesh network. So just click on the button, and the first thing it does is it puts a little line of cubes out there. That's our first mesh network. Basically, this mesh network is creating little instances of your cube. That's not strictly true. There are two ways of doing it. One's an instancing system, and one's a what should I struggling. One is just, let me just go, what is the correct term? It's just a geometry system, basically. So what if I run it like this? One is a mesh geometry and one's an instancer. Because we're using a small environment, I'm just going to be using a mesh type. And you can see the distribution type set to linear straight away. There it is. We have a few other options. We've got radial, grid, etc. But linear is the default. But we can change that anyway. So we're going to be adding, we're going to be changing this very shortly. Okay, so let's just have a little look at this distribution. So currently the distribution is set to 10. I think I'd be happy with, well, I'll come back to that number in a moment because I'm going to change the distribution type to radial. And no, I'm not going to change it to spherical. And spherical, to begin with, because there are 10 cubes, sets the 10 cubes out like so. And you can see one of the cubes is now above the light, so I'm just going to lift that light up a little bit. And I think what I'll also do is I'll just rotate that light around so it's pointing a little bit more down at the ground. Like so, he says. And let's get back in the room. Okay, just straighten my light out there. My middle mouse button is doing some kind of weird stuff. Flipped it upside down. Okay, so the mesh network that we created another element in our outliner over here called the Mesh Repro Mesh. And the Mesh Repro Mesh, not an easy one to say, has got some settings tucked away over here. If I go in, we can get to the various settings that we need. So let's just click on the ones that we want. So just go across until you can see the distribute option. And the distribute option now is currently set, the number of points is set to 10, but we're going to increase those. Now all these settings can be animated, which we will do in a moment. Okay, so just to go over that again, there are various distribution methods available to us. In this example, I'm going to use the spherical one. And to get something interesting, I think we need to increase the number of points. Okay. So far so good. Now let's look at the animation sequence itself. Let's drag the playhead back to 0. And what I'm going to do over here is I'm going to, inside the MASH network, before I do this, I'll just make a quick render to make sure that things are looking as I expect them to do. So just do a quick IPR render. And that's currently what it's going to look like, so that's fine. I might just drop the ground plane down a little tiny bit further, just a touch further. Let's do that again, quick IPR render. I think that's okay. Yep, and just a touch more. That'll do it. Okay, so with the playhead at frame 1, we're going to go into one of the drop downs here, the strength drop down, and we're going to take the strength all the way down to 0. And if you right click on that type in there, you can set a keyframe, at which point it will go red. And then if I go to drag the playhead to frame 80, and then change the strength to 1, right click again and hit set keyframe, and hit enter. I hit the tab key there just to enter that. Just double check that I've actually set that keyframe properly. Okay, I think I have now. And now when I hit the play key, it should animate a straightforward growth in effect of that distribution network. Very good. That's working straightforwardly. Okay, so let's go back to frame 0. And this time round, let's look at the angle. So let's just examine what this might do. So the angle is going to cause those to rotate, like so. So if I start at, say, I think I'll start, say, about 120. So if I go down to 0, and say about maybe frame 10, and we'll say when it gets to frame 10, let's have the angle at 120. When it gets to frame, I don't know, 40, 50, we'll go to frame 50. Let's change that angle to 271. Okay, and just experimenting, and then by the time we get to frame 80, let's change that all the way up to 360. Right click, set keyframe. Let's just check now. Does it? It's rotating. It's nice. Okay. Good. Alright, so let's stop that. Let's go down to frame 0. Let's look at the Y angle. So again, let's just move it forward a little bit so we can see the influence of this Y angle. What's it really doing? So that's kind of nice the way it's moving it around like that. Okay, so that's doing that. So let's go down to frame, let's take it back to there, go to frame 0, and I'll change the, not change, but I'll set the set key at 0, take it all the way to frame 40, and by the time it hits frame 40, I want it to be pretty much up there, so it'll be something like that. I'll hit set the key, and then by the time it hits 80, I want it to be all the way and set the key. Okay, just hit the play animation just to make sure that's working. That's nice. It's kind of coming around, just kind of going slowly for the end. That's good. Thank you very much. Okay, so I'm not going to change anything else just here. We're just going to leave everything pretty much as it is. So we've introduced the MASH network. We've got a light, a plane. We've used a few set keys. we've changed the settings, the animation settings, and now we're going to render the whole sequence out. And rendering sequence out requires a few little extra steps, so here we go. Normally you might just want to hit the IPR render to get an image presented like this, but in this case what we need is a sequence of images. So there's one little thing before we do the render. Let's add a camera. So using my viewport, I'm just going to say click on the word view, and I'm going to say create camera from view, and then I'm going to turn on the resolution gate, and the resolution gate pretty much shows me it's 560 by 540 pixels. That's the current setting, which is fine for what we're doing. And I'm now going to look at the render settings. So this time I'm going to flip over to the render interface, so the rendering interface, click that. I'm going to go to render settings, up the pop, and here we need to look at a couple of things. Okay, so firstly, give your render an appropriate name. Choose the image format. Now, if you want a really high quality image format, you go for TIFF or EXR. You're going to get a higher resolution, higher fidelity in the resolution. But for what we're doing, we're going to keep it short and sweet. We'll just go with JPEG. But you can, I'm happy for you to do TIFF or EXR. So I'm going to go with JPEG and put the quality to 100. This is a critical little file. Menu to click. It says name underscore and then number. Basically that's the name of the file, underscore, and then the number of the file of the frame, so frame 1 to 90. Okay, so there's an example of it up here. It'll show you it'll be mash animation underscore test, and it'll be 001 or 090 at the end. And the reason we've got three numbers there is that I've got the frame padding set to 3. If I set that to 4, you get an additional 0 in there. So it depends on the length of your animation, how you change this frame padding. Okay, so frame padding set to 3, start frame, end frame 1 to 90. I don't need to skip any frames, and I want 1 frame at a time. I'm going to select the camera, so it's PRS-P1, perspective 1, and the preset that we're going to use is the HD 540, which in effect is a 960 by 540 pixel output. So those settings are the ones we're going to use. There's one little other thing I want you to have a little look at, and it's inside Arnold Render. And I've put in here I've put the camera AA anti-aliasing up to 6. Again, that's just to increase the resolution and the quality of the final thing. Now, if you want this to speed up or you think it's all going too slow, you could put the AA down to 3. But for me, I'm just going to go with AA at 6. Okay, so those common settings there. Oh, by the way, here's something to note. Well, I'll come to this in a second. Accept those settings, or kind of set yours up in a similar fashion. And then one last little thing, we go into render, and we go to render sequence, but don't just click it. Click on the little button to the side. And in here, it's saying, what do you want to render? And I'm going to say perspective 1. And it's going to say, where do you want to put the output files? This is important. Do select a good folder. So I've got mine inside a folder that I created called mash animation underscore test. All these folders are inside Maya projects, default projects, and the images folder. So it's quite, you could put it anywhere, but that's where Maya likes to use this particular file structure. So projects, default, images. And then inside images, I've got another folder, and I've basically selected that as my animation output file area. Okay, so I would select that, you select it, and when you're ready, you hit render sequence. And once you've rendered a sequence, this is what you get. All the frames rendered out as stills 001 all the way to 090. Perfect. Inside the animation test and inside what they call the beauty render, which is the camera rendering out with light and textures. And then what we'll do after that, once that's been rendered out successfully, we'll go into Premiere. And basically, inside Premiere, all you've got to do is create a sequence in Premiere, like a 1080 sequence in Premiere, and then go into your media browser over here, right-click, choose Import, select the first of the files, make sure that the image sequence button is selected, and then it will bring them all in. You click Open, it will bring them all in as a single file. So they'll all get kind of like joined together as a single file, and you'll get your little animation pulled in there. And that's kind of what you're going to end up with. Okay, that's the target. Shouldn't take forever. Should be a bit of experimentation in there. Let's hope this works. Okay, thanks.